Production funding for Arts Upload has been provided in part by Muriel McBrien Kaufman Foundation, Hall Family Foundation, Francis Family Foundation, the Hartwig Family, Richard J. Stern Foundation for the Arts, Courtney S. Turner Charitable Trust, and viewers like you. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Randy Mason.
And I'm Maris Aylward.
I think this week Arts Upload has the right idea.
We're at the Boulevard Brewing Visitor Center with stories about an up-and-coming opera singer.
Plus another look at designer Rachel Ignatowski's Women in Science.
Some mixology and some classic rock caught on camera.
It's all ahead on The Upload.
The rigors of singing opera as a career. Where to begin?
You train, you work, you audition, you train some more, and you hope someone will pay you for it.
This year, the Lyric Opera of Kansas City introduced its first class of what they're calling the Resident Artist Program.
A chance to bridge the gap between schooling and the professional world.
Samantha Gossard is one of those 4 singers, and as the lyric season gets underway, she is thrilled by the program's possibilities.
I remember the first time I saw an opera. I was in college, actually. It came to me much later than in life than a lot of people who are in it. I was just mesmerized completely. The spectacle, the sheer sound, the fact that these voices were carrying over the orchestra in this great big hall. A mezzo-soprano is a lower female voice, soprano being the highest, mezzo-soprano is the middle, and then there are contraltos. We have a different tessitura, which is the range of voice where we're most comfortable singing for long periods of time. My teacher always tells me you have to say hello to your voice every day. Even if you're taking 10 minutes to vocalize in the shower, just to see what your voice is doing, because your voice, it's its own organ, it's its own muscle, and it grows and changes as your body grows and changes, and you have to know what it's doing.
For nearly every aspiring opera singer, finding the right teacher is essential. Like this man, world-renowned tenor Vincent Cole. Samantha worked with him during her graduate studies in Cleveland, then followed him to Kansas City, where he now serves on the faculty of his alma mater, the UMKC Conservatory.
He's so down to earth and just very nurturing, and has been such a mentor and friend to me for the past 6 years. I mean, he's really taught me most of the things that I know. You don't find many like him. I mean, he is a master of singing, and he can also teach it.
Okay. So that the she's a real joy to teach. You can't make somebody perfect, and you can't do everything, but there are times when there are different things you can do. When you have somebody who's as agile as she is, as an adaptive, you know, you can kind of mold and say, okay, try it this way, try it this way. Really, it's the little refinement things. When you take a breath, or when you sing a line, what's behind that? What's the thought behind it? As I always tell people, I said, you have to make sure that the end of the phrase is as good as the beginning of the phrase, because what they're going to hear is the end, and that's what's going to stick in their ears. So you want to make sure that you've got yourself set up correctly.
Cole can now add another credit to his already lengthy resume. Director of the Lyric's brand new Resident Artist Program, for which Samantha was selected. That means she and 3 of her cohorts, seen here at the recent Kaufman Bravo celebration, will play on-stage roles throughout the season, with an opportunity to study others as part of their professional development. It's the kind of program that Deborah Sandler believes will benefit not only young singers, but also the company and the community.
We're very excited that we have a wonderful chorus here and they're local. But for the most part, we bring our principal artists in through international audition. And so this way, if we're at a point in between productions, we have a group of people who are very comfortable setting out and we're doing special programs. And we're even starting a new series this year called the Exploration Series.
That exploring begins with an unexpected pairing of the Beatles and Schubert. Then on to music by Elvis Costello, and a trip through the American art song, with resident artists and a few guests doing the bulk of the vocal work. It's all part of the Lyrics' big push to bring new patrons into the fold.
It's the people who have never gone that we want to try to reach, to say, hey, give it a shot. Here, let's give you a point of entry that may, ease your journey.
These days, opera does pop up in commercials and on film soundtracks. Productions at the Met are streamed live into movie theaters. It may be centuries old, but younger singers like Samantha Gossard still feel its power.
The stories we get to tell are so very human. I often find that the art form, and really, honestly, live theater in general, gives people permission to feel and think things that they wouldn't otherwise feel or think. Singers in the opera world today are singing actors. I've been out of breath running around singing on recent productions. And I love that. I love that it's so active now.
Since I sing less now, it's very interesting to do something with young singers. It's never the top note, it's what sets it up.
You've been telling me that for years.
If any singer gets to enjoy what I got to enjoy all these years, it's the greatest joy of my life. I want them to have that same kind of feeling when they get to my age and they say, okay, I feel like I've really done something worthwhile, something I loved and enjoyed.
That's what makes it worth it to me. It's communicating the story, it's telling those stories, keeping that music alive, putting beauty in a world that really needs it. When I'm having my really down days and I'm like, I don't know how much longer I can do this. This is hard, like getting rejection after rejection, or I'm not getting this music isn't coming easily to me. I'm on a deadline. I've got to get, and when I'm having my really hard days, I think I kind of want to do something else, and then that's where my mind goes blank. And I can't really think of anything else I'd rather do. So I'm like, well, let's get back to it.
Well, from one talented young woman to another, in a different field altogether.
Last summer, we introduced you to Rachel Ignatowski, a rising young designer working on a series about women in science.
This summer, Rachel's delightful and sometimes surprising profiles of 50 female scientists was released by 10 Speed Press.
It's made the New York Times bestseller list, reason enough for us to look back on this piece from producer Ashley Holcroft.
There we go, that's good. There's Thor. See, I got to say pretty boy lips for smooching. They let me write whatever I want. It's a really, I love working with clients who trust me because then I get a lot of really cool work done.
Pretty boy lips for smoochin', bullets a daytime to evening look. Arc reactor may cause heartburn. Just some of the wonderfully creative fodder Rachel Ignatowski conjures in her creative Casey lair for one of her many high-profile clients. This time, it's for Fandango.com.
For the Avengers series, they kind of called me up and they were like, we would like to do something with the Avengers. We need it really quick. What do you want to do? So I said, why don't we just do an anatomy of them? And they say, okay, thank you. And then I say, yay, and then they feature me. And that's it.
Which begs the question, how does one get on the mighty Fandango's carte blanche contact list? Well, there are a few things you need to know about Rachel. First off, she's been at this a while.
I knew I wanted to go into art when I was really young. So around 16 is when I got really serious about it, and I started going to pre-college classes and getting my portfolio together. And I always had an interest in science and biology. In fact, if I didn't go into art, I was going to maybe become a doctor or something like that. But I liked art much better.
She's also passionate about gender equality, which made for a uniquely successful formula that proved to be her golden ticket.
How my Women in Science series started was I have a lot of friends who are teachers, and we were sitting around and we're discussing, the gender gap that still exists. Science, mathematics, technology, engineering, those are all still very much boys' games. And so I started, researching it a little more, and I thought, I could, if I just draw these women in this sort of new whimsical way that no one's really doing right now, maybe that'll spark some people's interest in it. And also just to celebrate them so that people who have been inspired by these women can have them up on their wall and be like, oh, thank you, Barbara McClintock. You really, really inspired me. That's why I'm in genetics.
The series includes popular favorites like Dr. Jane Goodall, the first woman in space, Valentina Tereshkova, to names and fascinating stories that have been buried in the history books, like the mother of the first complex computer code, COBOL, Grace Hopper, or pioneers of entire fields of science.
Mary Anning, who was pretty much the first paleontologist of her time, she found the first real full dinosaur skeleton. She wasn't allowed to be published because she was a woman. They weren't allowed to, and she was a poor woman at that. But she fought her way to get that information out there by being brave and becoming associated with noble gentlemen who then published that work for her and basically helped start that field.
From paleontology to the first person to ever win a Nobel Prize in 2 different fields of science.
Just Marie Curie, who's probably one of the best known ones. I mean, they didn't even want to give her her second Nobel Prize. And she also got very discredited because she was a woman and a foreigner to France. And you know what she did? She kept working, and then she drove a frickin' X-ray truck and helped soldiers with broken bones. And it's amazing. All the glass ceilings they had to break, all the rules they had to break to get to where they are and to accomplish what they accomplished. I think the best way to fight gender bias is through examples of strong females and to normalize women in positions of power.
So when International Women's Day rolled around, Instagram took notice and featured her series.
It was really taken off online. I have gone from having 1,500 followers to having over 40,000 followers. That has really motivated me to turn this into a book.
A book featuring 50 of these amazing women will be published in fall of 2016. But from that event, something even better happened.
I would come home from work and I felt like I was working another 40-hour week outside of work. And it started off as a little trickle where the first thing that happened was people started buying stuff from my shop, and then all of a sudden I'm making rent, and then I'm making the same amount that I'm making at my day job. And then after that, all these different blogs and newspapers started picking me up, and I didn't expect it to happen so quickly, but I always knew that something would happen if I worked hard.
So she quit her job at Hallmark and set off on her own. Now she happily spends her days researching and drawing.
I'm just so happy that I make a living doing this kind of work where I learn every day, and it's I feel like I retired. It's nuts. I feel like I'm Coca Cabana, except sitting in my room and researching and drawing.
So far, she's worked with dozens of clients, from independent films to childhood cancer research organizations, breaking down complex science into understandable infographics, similar to what she does in her anatomy series, which includes what happens to the brain in love, the novel workings of the heart, cell structure, and many more. But there was one in particular that struck a special chord.
A while ago, I got this little piece of fan mail from this father who bought my respiratory system print, and his daughter has CF. And so she's 4 years old and she has to use a respirator at night. So he emailed me saying, thank you so much, because everything else that's out there kind of looks scary. And yours is all cuddly and happy, and she understands. It really calmed her, and he was happy that he could have that moment with his daughter. And it's one of those things where you're like, wow, illustration is a tool to help connect people with information that seems scary and dense and unapproachable. I think there's a way to start conversations by putting smiley faces on some cells. It's been amazing. It's been like, we'll see what happens next.
We do like to say that Arts Upload exists to prove that Kansas City is America's creative crossroads.
And the story of Boulevard Beer, founded by John McDonald back in 1989, fits nicely into that narrative.
The brewery's tours were so popular they were booked way in advance. So this summer, they formed the Boulevard Brewing Visitors Center just down the street in this old building.
They have displays and memorabilia from the company's history. There's a tasting room and a beer hall with food service, not to mention expanded retail opportunities.
Best of all, tours can now be accommodated on a much more timely basis. The Visitors Center opens at 10, tasting room not till 11.
Well, while we're on the topic of food and drink, our digital magazine Flatland KC has a new podcast called Mixtapes and Mixology.
It's a mashup of music and the cocktail scene with Jonathan Bender from Recommended Daily.
Each episode pairs a tune by a local artist with a custom concoction, like the Pegasus, created by Zack Snyder at Westside Local.
So how I made this was I started out by infusing some Calvados, which is apple brandy made from France. Started out with that, infusing rosemary into Calvados, and then I made a honey syrup with orange and cinnamon. And add a little bit of lemon just for some balance. Aside for a second. And here at the Westside Local, we do things a little differently with our Louisville Slugger. So what I'm going to do is crush some ice real quick. So I really wanted to incorporate the hops. And being that we're the Westside Local, we like to do things as local as possible. So we're going to top this with a little bit of Alpha Pale Ale from Corn Label. Alpha Pale, and some apple bitters, just to reinforce that apple flavor from the Calvados. Yeah. My garnish here is a little orange rose with some rosemary. That is a Pegasus.
You can download all 4 of the podcasts, including songs by Jessica Page and Yes You Are, at flatlandkc.org.
Speaking of music, our final story this week rolls back the clock on some classic rock that a Denver photographer managed to capture decades ago.
Dan Fong was in the right place at the right time to document some pretty notable moments in modern music.
Dan Fong's ticket into the world of rock and roll wasn't bought.
These are the kind of setups I did in dressing room.
Fong's ticket inside that world was his food.
I was kind of like a concierge in the dress room. Did the food, booze, whatever they needed. You become friends. They become comfortable with you. So if you're out there shooting photos, they're not like, who's that guy? Get him out of here. And so here I am in the dressing room. I'm taking pictures.
Pictures of some of the world's legends of rock and roll.
Here's Stevie Wonder opened for him. Real young age, you know. And then here's Jagger playing guitar, tuning up during a concert.
The Doobie Brothers, The Who, The Rolling Stones. Fong estimated he's taken tens of thousands of photos since the 1960s. but he's only seen a fraction of them.
Well, I hated the darkroom. You had to be a master at doing prints. I didn't have the enthusiasm to do that, so I would shoot, process the film, stick them in a folder. Shoot, process. It was fast-moving time. These photographs are rare, you know, because they really did, even then, they wouldn't let people in the dressing room stuff. What I've done is I haven't cropped anything out. I think that everything in the shot is historically valid, you know, down to the guitar in the corner, to like the type of booze they were drinking, yeah, you know, and the way the dressing room set up. When I shot The Who, I wasn't even aware of some of the photographs I had because I didn't have enough negative sleeves. So I stacked a whole bunch of negatives and I stuffed them in 1 or 2 negative sleeves.
Not long ago, Fong sorted through the sleeves and was surprised to find hundreds of frames.
And it just blew my mind. I spent the next 2 weeks scanning the stuff.
Eventually, he printed them. Now, the never-before-seen photos are part of the exhibit The Who 50th Anniversary at the Robert Anderson Gallery.
Well, I think people don't realize how hard it was to take photographs back then. They weren't autofocus cameras, they weren't automatic exposure cameras. It was very hard. You know, I shot transparency, and if you're off a third of a stop, your shot is blown. This is taking it to the streets, you know, platinum and gold.
Fong also worked as media coordinator for the Doobie Brothers. He designed several album covers, including Taking It to the Streets. That cover turned out differently than he proposed.
Do not use, you know, this is the original color. It was supposed to be black. And I showed him the proofs before they left on the plane. They got back from Japan. He looked at it in black and got real pissed off and wanted me fired and changed the album cover to white. But they didn't fire me. I never thought that I was that great of a photographer when I was doing it. And it's really funny looking at the stuff now because I look at it and go, geez, man, I didn't do bad.
Fong's not the only one pleasantly surprised by his work.
My God, you have the only pictures of us opening for Cat Stevens.
In addition to photographing internationally known rockers, Fong also fixed his lens on Colorado legends of rock. Among them, R&B singer-songwriter Chris Daniels, Harry Tufte, considered the Rocky Mountain region's godfather of folk music, and funk singer Freddie Gowdy.
So something that I read that former Doobie Brothers drummer John Hartman said is that you capture, quote, the depth of the subject's personality. Do you think that's true?
I do a lot to ease the subjects, whatever tensions they have.
Though there are times Fong likes to agitate instead of ease.
Today, I went out and bought some sour candy. I'm going to say, take this, eat this candy. 1, 2, 3. Suck on them good now.
Digital cameras have eliminated some of the challenges Fong faced earlier in his career, but he said his approach to photography hasn't changed.
I feel like I'm taking a picture of somebody's soul when I do this. That's always something in the back of my mind.
Fong keeps something else in mind, the food that first endeared him to rock stars 50 years ago. That's why he still puts out a heck of a spread.
It's just like any craft. The longer you do it, the better you get.
And that brings us to the end of another edition of Arts Upload. Oh gosh, what's a guy to do when he's stuck at the Boulevard Brewing Visitors Center?
I think we know the answer to that. Till next week, when we'll take you to the Kemper Museum for a new exhibit about building bridges. I'm Maricel.
And I'm Randy Mason, taking one for the team.
Production funding for Arts Upload has been provided in part by Muriel McBrien Kaufman Foundation, Hall Family Foundation, Francis Family Foundation, the Hartwig Family, Richard J. Stern Foundation for the Arts, Courtney S. Turner Charitable Trust, and viewers like you. Thank you.